Hello and welcome to Tasting History. As you can see, today is a little bit different because I am joined by Ken Albala, a food historian and personal hero. He has been on the show before, but never here in person, so I'm really excited to be working with him today. We're doing a bit of a Q&A, so it's a little bit different. However, we also did cook a dish of chicken and cherries.
It comes out of a 17th century manuscript I read at the Folger Library in Washington, D.C. It's anonymous, so we'd have no idea who wrote it or why. Chances are it's probably a woman who wrote it for her family or for her daughter, handed it down. To boil chickens with cherries, take strong broth, strain it into a pipkin, and put in your chickens with a little sweet marjoram, parsley, and thyme. Bind them in a bundle, and put them in with a little white wine, whole mace, sugar, and a spoonful of rose water, and let them boil well. And when they are ready to serve, put in the cherries picked from the stalks, then strain in the yolks of 2 or 3 eggs, and a little salt, and so serve them on sippets.
2 words in there that we might not know. Pipkins, it's a cute word, and sippets.
Yeah, so pipkin is a little form of the word pipe. A pipe means a barrel shape. Pipkin means a little one, like mannequin is a little man.
Is that what that means? Yep. Oh my gosh, I never put that together.
So a pipkin is just a little clay vessel that people used to put right on the fire. Usually has 3 legs and a handle that you can put in a stick or an iron rod to move it in and out of the fire.
Now, would people, if they didn't have a pipkin at home, be able to cook this in a pot that was in the oven, or?
I would say just use any old pot and put it in the oven.
And then sippets.
So a sippet is another really fun word. So sip is the same word as sop, where we get the word soup, meaning liquid. And a sippet means a little one. So this is a little bit of bread that soaks up the stuff that you make, the broth that you add in.
Sops it up.
Yeah, sop.
Ah.
It's a little sip.
Very nice. So now that we know what a pipkin is and a sippet, what else do you need for this recipe? 1 small Cornish game hen, a few sprigs of fresh marjoram, a few sprigs of fresh parsley, a few sprigs of fresh thyme, some Pinot Grigio, some chicken broth. The amounts of both of those are going to kind of depend on how big your pot is. Some whole mace, a tablespoon of rose water, some fresh cherries, 3 egg yolks, some salt, and a loaf of white bread cut into sippets. And it's best if those are toasted in the oven.
Our instinct is often to have a nice rustic loaf, but actually white bread was far more valued. So the whiter you could get and the fluffier, they would have loved Wonder Bread. But don't use Wonder Bread, just use a regular little round white loaf. That would have been called a manchet.
So first, tie your herbs into a bundle and stuff that into the chicken. Then stuff the chicken into the pipkin or the pot and fill it halfway up with broth and the rest of the way with wine. Then add the mace, the sugar, and the rose water. So once you've put all of the ingredients into the pot, then pop it into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. And while we bake our chicken, let's do a bit of Q&A. This first one comes from Tiny Home Chronicles from YouTube. What is the first instance of aspic or gelatin being used as a food item to bind things?
There probably is aspic prehistorically, because we know people were boiling things in pots, leaving them aside, and if you have boiled bones, you know that it solidifies if it gets cold.
Right.
So there's probably unintentional aspic made, as you do with your turkey gravy on Thanksgiving, right?
Unintentional aspic. That's going to be the name of my my ABBA cover band.
Well, yeah, the first time the recipes are actually written down intentionally is the Middle Ages. And then aspics become really popular, and they're interestingly, they're kind of like medieval. The medieval ones are kind of like 1950s aspics, is because they like layers of colors, and
right.
They'd use saffron and parsley for green and blue for turnsole for blue. And I think if you were to be served a medieval aspic, you'd say, "Oh my God, this is so 50s retro," and they are
really retro. This next question comes from W. Worldly Troper, I believe, from Twitter. Thoughts on the common belief that Marco Polo brought pasta from China?
Yeah, so Marco Polo mentions something that comes from a starch that comes from palms, and he says, "Oh, look, they have noodles that are kind of like ours," and clearly there's already pasta in Italy at the time. The Genoese had had it before. they get it probably from the Muslim population in Sicily. And we're even exporting it. So the story itself was actually made up by an ad campaign in, I think, the 20s or 30s in the United States that were trying to sell American pasta and wanted to make up this silly story. So it's entirely fabricated.
Now, you mentioned the Muslim influence on the European cuisine, and Robert Thompson from YouTube says, how did the Muslim conquest change European diets?
Well, Muslims took over North Africa and spread into Spain by 711. They brought with them citrus fruit and spinach and artichokes and things that, if you even look at the words al-kharshuf, artichoke, it has nothing to do with choking artery. Rice, arroz comes from Arabic, azúcar comes from Arabic. So they brought that, they brought irrigation techniques and ways of managing land. So that's one level. That's how all those ingredients get into Europe. But I would say also the sort of spiced cuisine that lasts from about the year 1000 all the way through about the middle of the 17th century. Combinations of spices and sugar and almond milk and things like that, those will come directly from the Middle East.
So speaking of dishes that kind of were in the Middle East as well as Europe and all over, Steven Salerno from Patreon asks, how did once universal dishes like blancmange disappear?
Well, blancmange didn't actually disappear. It changed entirely. It's, to start, for those of you who don't know, blancmange is a chicken dish, or it's actually capon usually, and it's poached, and then the white flesh of the breast is just shredded and then pounded, and then to that is added sugar and rose water and sometimes almond milk or rice starch. And so it's kind of a sweet chicken pudding, if you can think of it like that. Yeah. And it's delicious. And I've had people like just horrified at the idea of a chicken pudding. And then I say, well, stop and think of what a chicken McNugget tastes like. And put it in your mouth, and then you say, oh, now I get it.
It's chicken pudding.
It's chicken pudding. So that dish still exists in Turkey, actually. But the evolution of it in Europe was to take the chicken out gradually, and then it becomes a light, fluffy, sweet almond dessert. In France, blancmange is kind of typical. Yeah. It's the same dish, really.
Urgt, that's URGT, from Twitter wants to know, are there any poisonous or otherwise nutritionally questionable historic foods?
There are a lot of them, actually. And I've been trying to figure out why they got banned, as it were. Roux is a very good example. The ancient Romans loved roux, and they pounded it into a lot of their sauces, and it's kind of bitter and really lovely aromatic flavor if you use it in balance. And once you get to the sort of Middle Ages, it disappears from the cooking. It's only in herbal books as medicine, right. And it says that it causes abortion. So, and if you read, if you try to buy it today, there's warnings on it. So I don't recommend people use it, but I think that's one that people ate in the past, and for most people it's not going to harm them at all. Pennyroyal is another one that you find in ancient cuisine that's delicious. It's just a beautiful, minty, fresh, in-your-face kind of flavor, and you can buy it and use it, but it's like, using anything that's slightly dangerous. Yeah. That makes it more fun, right?
Like adding just a hint of lead to your water can really spice it up.
Well, it does make it sweeter.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Romans, a lot of people asked about lead being used in Roman cookery, either on purpose or not on purpose, to sweeten things.
Yeah, it can kill you.
So Alicia Harvey from Patreon asks, which of your books was the hardest to research and why, and have you ever encountered something entirely unexpected? He has written many, many books, so obviously Alicia has read some of them.
It's a difficult question. I think the hardest one was my first, which came out of my doctoral dissertation, and I think it was basically linguistically very challenging because it was I had to read books in half a dozen languages, about 100 of them, some of them thin, some of them 1,500 pages long. So it took me years, 3.5 years to do that. I don't have the leisure to do that kind of research anymore, so I never have again, really. And I tell people who want to get a doctoral dissertation that, it's a wonderful luxury. Enjoy it. You can just sit in someplace and just soak up, your literature. So that was it was hard to do. I would say there are other books that were hard for other reasons because the material wasn't there, or most of what was written was complete nonsense. I've been trying to write a book on aphrodisiacs for about 20 years, and I think it will be done. A friend is helping me do the second half, but 99% of what's been written about it in modern times is just made up. So
That's so much history in general. It's just made up. And it's hard sometimes to decipher what was made up and what was not, because some of it was made up so long ago that the truth has been
right, or people have been repeating it
lost,
so long.
and reputable people who you trust, but they've been taken in.
Right.
Especially anything that the Victorians said.
Well, it's like this idea that,
wrong.
the spices were put on the food to cover up the smell of rotting meat. And it's like, no one
Right.
ever did that,
Yeah.
And it just, someone said it at some point, and it got repeated.
It's like, if you can afford the spices, you can afford fresh meat.
Exactly. Exactly.
Buteo from Twitter asks, why did the food in the 50s and 60s suck so often?
There's a very simple reason. People were very trustful of science, and there were a ton of things that they'd invented for the war effort, like, food in little trays and freeze drying and, new food technologies. And when the war ended, at plastic too, incidentally, they thought, what do we do with all this stuff? Sell it to civilians. They'll eat it in TV dinners. So it was really the inventions of the industrial food system that convinced people that cooking stinks. You hate cooking, don't you? And you want to be doing other things. And so we'll do the cooking for you. Convenience and flavor goes out the window. And they sold things that were, filled with salt and sugar and a lot of, artificial flavorings at that point and preservatives. And people said, oh, I don't have to cook. And that's why it sucked, basically.
Yeah. And I wonder how much, especially with the sugar and the salt to a degree, especially with the sugar, and especially here in the US, how that has changed our palates completely.
Totally. And I've done this just on an experimental basis to see what would happen. If you can wean yourself off of sugar completely. You can wean yourself off of salt, which is strange, because I love salty things. But if you start to cut back on it, you just get used to it, in a week or so. Do this experiment. Eat some Doritos. See whether you can taste anything else afterwards. You can't really, And I love Doritos. I'm not saying anything bad about them. It's just that, you blow out your palate and you become jaded, I think.
Right. I do love Doritos, though. So Jez from YouTube wants to know, what recipe took the longest to make and was it worth it?
So I got to a point where I thought in my life that making things more difficult and dangerous was a good idea. And so if I could make something last years, that took years, I would do it. So the project was making a sandwich, basically. And sandwich can take a minute, but I decided that I wanted bread made from wheat that I'd grown and that I'd milled by hand, and that I had fermented with sourdough, and that I actually had to build a brick oven to do this in my backyard, which I did. And so the bread itself took a year or so, and then cured the meat and made the cheese and aged that for 6 months. And so it was an exercise in absurdity, obviously, but at some point, someone actually who wanted a sandwich had to go through all that labor. So that's why I did it. Just, it was crazy. And the dumbest part about the whole thing is I grew wheat in barrels, and I had planted about a handful of wheat, and I yielded about a handful of wheat at the end. So I only got like 1.5 loaves out of the whole thing. But it was fun.
Honestly, that would be a really cool, long-term YouTube video project.
Right.
Is, the 2-year sandwich.
Exactly.
That's something like Mr. Beast would do or something. He's a YouTuber who does those kinds of crazy things. Maybe I will. Not going to happen. Frecky from Twitter asks, how has historical class coding of food influenced modern food habits, e.g. white bread versus whole wheat?
Ooh, this is a fascinating question. So I think if there are many social levels in a society, and there are people with enough money to imitate those people directly above them, the people above say, oh, those people can cook with this spice or with sugar or something, is they start to change. Is that it kind of pushes fashion to keep doing something new, to come out with the latest model or the latest design in clothes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So this has a direct impact on food because spices are a good example. When spices become more available in the 16th century and there's direct trade route to Asia, elite people suddenly say, well, if everyone can afford this or get it, it's not a mark of status anymore. We'll move on to something else. But bread is also a very good example, but weird in that white bread is the really, really esteemed thing. Brown bread, rough, coarsely ground, unbolted bread is for peasants. And once white bread can be made industrially, totally switches. Now people want, rustic-looking loaves, even if they're fake, rustic-looking loaves. So it's not a constant push in one direction. It can sometimes switch, where the social meaning of something can switch entirely. Sugar was very, very elite, and now it's candy. We've pushed it to the end of a meal where we say it's okay for children, but real adults don't eat sweet things. But so do I. And it's just, it's something that we're hardwired to like. But socially, we're trained not to like it because it's become devalued.
JP from YouTube asks, how did the public perception of the position of chef change over history, and when did the profession of chef start?
Oh gosh, so chefs started out being slaves in the ancient world, mostly, and they're sort of the butt of jokes, and they're dirty and unpleasant, and they're called cooks, of course. When you get to around the 16th century, there's a couple of examples before then. Guillaume Tirel is a good example. He's ennobled, has 3 stew pots on his coat of arms, which is great. But I would say it really happens with the print medium that a chef's picture can be in the frontispiece of the book, like Mrs. Bugo or Scapi. Right. So that's right about the point that artists are professionalizing and cooks are also, and becoming chefs and getting status and wanting a decent pay. And if you look in Scapi in the first chapters, he has all sorts of perquisites. I get to keep the fat, I get to do all this X, Y, and Z, and it means that their status is rising, and there's a more formal system of apprenticeship and eventually guilds in many places where they regulate the profession. And then in France especially, it's, you get to the level of Vatel, where this is a member of court. But I think chefs have always kind of been struggling with that. What they're doing is basically a craft, but they want to be thought of as artists. And a great chef is just that. It's like a painter.
So the last question comes from Incilience A from YouTube. To what extent do you think people's idea about health and medicine influenced what and how they cooked at the time? It's a good question.
It is a great question, and one that I've been trying to answer for my entire career. I think if you look at culinary literature, cookbooks, and you look at dietary literature, they run in tandem. It's the same wealthy people who want to eat well and then need to be cured because they've been eating well, and they are at odds always. The gourmand is saying, eat this because it's great, and the dietitian is saying, don't eat that because it's going to kill you or have this effect. But they do intersect in interesting ways, because sometimes the cook will take the advice of the physician, and sometimes the physician will say, well, you're not going to eat this unless it really tastes good, right? So they do intersect at interesting points in history. But when you try to say, do people actually follow the dietary literature, it's impossible to tell, because they don't record what they eat, and they don't say, unless they're explicitly writing down in a diary, today I'm on this, court diet or doing this thing. Everyone has the ideas in their head often, and they'll make them feel guilty about doing certain things and eating things, and they'll go and do what they want anyway. But I think it is fascinating to see that people are increasingly conflicted, and more so today than ever. But we assume that's a modern phenomenon. It's not. It goes all the way back to the ancients, not just in the Western tradition with like Galen and Hippocrates, but in ancient Chinese medicine, their food and health are much more closely aligned. In medieval Muslim medicine, that's borrowed really from the Greeks. It's also very close sometimes. An author like Avicenna will have recipes, what look like recipes sometimes in his medical advice. But, there's a direct thread from there all the way up to the present, where you have cookbooks that are supposed to be healthy.
We just heard our chicken ding, so we're going to take it out of the oven and finish up the sauce and then give it a try. So once the chicken is out of the oven, take it out of the pot and set it aside while you temper the eggs with just a bit of the broth that the chicken cooked in. Then set that over a low heat and cook for 5 to 7 minutes and add in the cherries and let it cook for a couple more minutes and then it's ready.
All we did was put that on top of the sops and then pour the sauce on.
And here we are, 17th century chicken with cherries.
And we're going to do it with our fingers.
We're gonna do it with our fingers. Why?
Well, forks have been invented, but the English hadn't really taken to them yet.
And I kind of just want to try the bread before I even try the chicken. That's really quite nice. I get a lot of the herbs that were in there.
Totally.
Really, really shine through.
And just slightly sweet in the sugar.
You know what I'm not getting is the rose water.
No, interestingly. That's right.
And I like rose water, so, and that really kind of makes an old dish like this taste much different. So, see? I'm glad that they have forks now.
Yeah.
Napkin for you, Ken. So this is wonderful. It's definitely one that's worth trying. It's super easy.
Yeah.
What's cool though is this recipe came from something that isn't published,
Right.
as it were. So
And I think because it's in manuscript form, it means that someone actually cooked it. They took the time to write
Right.
it down in a book. This is like their favorite recipe. It's not just
Right.
printed somewhere.
well, especially in a lot of those old cookbooks, you really do wonder if anyone
Right.
ever actually made this.
Yeah.
They just kind of put it together because they don't always work. Anyway, well, thank you so much for coming, Ken. This was a treat for me.
Me too.
And, hopefully we can do it again soon. There are a lot more questions to go through, so
Great.
we'll do it again.
Great fun. Thanks.
Thanks. See you all next time.